It's so wonderful to see all of you, and it's a delight to be here with Michele Norris. I can give her an introduction, but how about this? Award-winning journalist, best-selling author, all around Michele Norris. Extraordinary human being. So let's begin with a few questions here. So how did you come to the idea of the Race Card Project and then to this powerful book?
First of all, can I begin with gratitude? Because I think that's where we should always begin. Thank you so much for having me here at the book festival. I love the idea of a Mardi Gras of the mind. I think we should sort of stay in that place all the time. I'm really honored to be here, and thank you for agreeing to have this conversation with me.
Of course.
Because we usually, if we talk, it's usually in quick snippets, so we get to kind of marinate a little bit.
In between Joe interrupting us,
yes,
right?
Yes. So we get to marinate a little bit today. So I'm a storyteller and a story collector. And I've always been a little bit of a story collector as a journalist, because that's what we do. We tell stories, but now I actually collect stories. I collect people's stories. And I started doing that almost out of a combination of anxiety or anxiousness, really not anxiety, anxiousness and desperation, because I had written a book about my family's very complex racial legacy. I'm from Minnesota. My father's from Birmingham, Alabama. When Barack Obama was elected, America was talking about becoming post-racial. Now, see, you say this word now, and you're like, But at the time, people were like rubbing their hands together and saying, "Oh, we're possibly past all the icky stuff."
Right.
And I thought, "Oh, we just sent a black family to the White House. Y'all better put your seatbelts on, because we're not post-racial." And I set out to write a book about race in America, and I wound up writing about my family because suddenly the elders in my family started to unload stories about living in an America where they loved an America that did not love them back. They kept a lot of this to themselves. And seeing a black man in the White House just unleashed, I'd be at dinner and it'd be like, pass the peas. Let me tell you what happened to me in 1958. And so I wound up writing a book about my family's complex racial legacy. I was out in the world. I was on sabbatical from NPR briefly. I was on a 35-city book tour. And I was under the impression that no one wanted to talk about race.
Right.
Because that had been my experience. As a journalist, if I had recommended a 6-part series on racial disparities, and it wasn't February, I could kind of clear the room. People would be like, nah, I have someplace to be. So I thought I had to have an invitation, and that's why I created the Race Card Project. It began literally with postcards. And I went to a Kinko's near my house in Washington, D.C. on Wisconsin Avenue. And I printed 200 postcards. And the idea was that I asked people to think about the word race, and I'll ask the room, right now, think about the word race. And whatever pops into your minds, your memories, your questions, your laments, your anthems, then try to take that and reduce it into one sentence that has only 6 words. And the idea was, they were the little black postcards, and they said, race, your thoughts, 6 words, please send. My parents are both postal workers, so I was doing my part to support the U.S. Postal Service.
My daddy was a postman too, so yeah.
And but my mother, who's my father's gone to glory. My mother is still alive. Talked to her this morning. And the original postcards were not the right size, and she's like, "So, honey, I love this idea, but those are too small." So I had to get the next ones I printed were street legal, but for the original ones that I printed, there were 200, Eddie, and of the 200, about 30% came back to me. I was leaving postcards everywhere. I was on this big book tour, and everywhere I went, when the 30% came back to me, I thought, let's keep going. Publisher printed cards for me. Everywhere we went, we got to know printers all over the country, and I was like the Pied Piper of postcards. If you were at a hotel, if you were staying at the Marriott here in New Orleans, and you were in need of a good word before you went to bed, and you reached into the night table next to the bed, and you pulled out the Bible, what's this? A postcard would fall out. Because I had left one in the Bible. I'd left one in the pocket of the airline. I'd left one in the condiment station at the restaurant. And and people started sending 6-word stories back to me.
Using their own stamps. You didn't put stamps on these postcards. No.
They were not but that was one of the reasons why I had to keep going. Because most of the submissions, we have archived now more than 500,000 submissions. Most of them come in digitally now.
Right.
Because we created a website, and most people send their submissions now digitally. But in the beginning, they were all postcards. And the intention behind a postcard, you have to find a pen. And I mean, a couple of them, there are a couple cases, both women wrote in crayon, and I thought, something happened to her, and she just picked up, because I have, you can't find a pen, you just picked up a crayon, wrote it in crayon. You have to find a pen, a writing instrument. You have to find a stamp. Mm-hmm. We don't use snail mail so much, so not everybody has that little roll of stamps that our parents always had, right? You have to find a mailbox. And then you send your truth through the mail on a postcard for the world to see. That was the other thing, is people were saying incredible things out loud on postcards with no cover. And so I have I've worked with the same UPS store for, I've been doing this 14 years now. And the young man who was the skateboarder who worked now runs the place. He's now a man. But the guys who worked there, they were all, it was like this cast of clerks. Mm-hmm. They were kind of skateboarders, they had funky hair, tattoos, earrings. They loved the postcards because they would come in and they would sit and, and they would talk about them.
So when they started coming in, what did you notice? So you said that you didn't think people wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
You're engaged in this rather odd thing of leaving these postcards all around in Bibles, in hotels, and on counters and places. And 30% of these folks started returning.
Yeah.
And so what did you begin to see?
Humanity. I began to see, I should say at the beginning, because we were in that post-racial phase in America, a lot of people were saying, in the beginning, there were some things that changed. In the beginning, a lot of people, at the very beginning, wouldn't sign their name. They would sign Anon, or Anon. And I thought this was a new name. And I was like, is this one of these new biblical names that...
A preface to QAnon? No.
Yes, it was before QAnon, but... And my kids is like, Mom, that's anonymous. But I thought it was like, how are all these people named Anon? Is that? But when we created the website,
right.
This is where modeling is important.
You want you to speak louder? Okay.
When we created, I'm a low talker, a little bit like the Jerry Seinfeld character, so let me get a little closer. When we created the website, I think through modeling, people saw, other people are signing their names, so they signed their names too. And so most people now sign their names. But in the beginning, a lot of people would say things like, only one race, the human race, or can't we all just get along? But every so often, a card would come in and it'd be like, boom, white not allowed to be proud. I'm only Asian when it's convenient. I was taught they smelled bad. Too black for black men's love. I mean, I'm going to give you a sense of this.
Yeah,
I'm going to ask
please,
you.
Please.
So, no, I'm going to ask you to read it.
Oh.
Because, I do this all the time.
This is what happens when you have to interview Michele Norris,
Okay, so we can do it together. Can you read this?
Which one?
We'll read a couple pages, and we'll just go every other one. And I'll start here.
Okay.
Or, actually, you start.
Yeah, but you're not black.
I'm light-skinned. My black is harder.
Red hair gets the most stares.
Black kid in my math class?
People can hear the unspoken word.
Just stop making everything about race.
Repeating proper pronunciation hurts my feelings.
Can't pronounce my name? Try harder.
Born in America, I am American.
You don't know what I believe?
Wouldn't have been white 100 years ago.
So much depends on so little.
Son upset, called white boy on bus.
Why must our differences be wrong?
This old wound will never heal.
No, I did not steal that.
Only racist when I'm at Walmart.
Never eat fried chicken in public.
Underneath, we all taste like chicken.
It's hard being the white friend.
You're Mexican? But we're so similar.
Not illegal, human, and deserving compassion.
Not all Mexicans can do landscaping.
Please, Hispanic is not a race.
You're white and you can dance?
The only Jew on Easter Sunday.
I'm not just Caucasian, I am Caucasian.
Spelled C-A-U-C-A-J-U-N. You feel superior, but you're not.
Since when am I a racist?
Why'd you invite the white guy? So that gives you a sense of the poetry. I mean, you think, what can people possibly say in 6 words? That's just, an example of what came over the transom.
So, I wanted to go to, but I want to ask this question first. As they were coming in, what stopped you in your tracks? Something that you said, oh, this is so ugly. And then another one that said, oh, this is so beautiful.
There's so many that
500,000?
Yeah, I mean, but there are a few stand out. One that I think is beautiful, and I actually, we talk, we text each other. My son is not half, he's double. I love that. We are so hung up on the bifurcation of races when people are in blended families. And he and his wife, he's white, she's Asian, and they just decided, based on a Korean poet's philosophy, that they were not going to let him walk through life cleaved in half. And instead, and just that simple thing flips everything, right? Mm-hmm. One that stopped me in my tracks recently that came in when I was in New York. When we do the race car project, I have a little small and mighty team that's been at this for 15 years. We punch way above our weight. But when we created business cards, when we still had business cards before we all have QR codes now, we would, I know, I still did. We would reach into the inbox and put one of the 6-word stories on the card. Oh. And so Melissa Bear, who's been with me from the beginning, her 6 words that she put on her card were, "Grandma, you can't say that anymore." And Amrit Dillon, who's South Asian, her 6 words that she always put on her card was, "No, I don't like spicy food." Because everyone assumes, since she's South Asian, that she wants all the hot sauce. And she's like, I have a sensitive stomach, I can't eat this. The 6 words that I would always put on my card was, "Lady, I don't want your purse." Because that was one of the cards that he used humor, but he's talking about something that we can all relate to. Can I ask the question? How many of you have been in a space where you have walked onto an elevator, walked down the street, you're at the grocery store, someone walks past you who's different than you, and you don't even know why you do it, but you pat your wallet to make sure it's still there? You don't even know why. You grab your purse a little bit closer, you drive through a neighborhood, and you see somebody on the corner, they don't look like you, different zip code, different faith, different color, and you try to be all slick about it and try to hit the door lock? How many of you have done one of those things? Let's be honest. Okay, I think we're not being honest. How many of you have had that done to you? The person who did that probably moves on and doesn't think about it. The person who witnessed that can't stop thinking about it. And so the card that hit me later in conversation with the "Lady, I don't want your purse," that arrived in New York was, "I'm not intimidating, you are intimidated." A perfect a retort to that, right? I'm not, and it really makes you think, so many people of color are always inoculating other people's fears, because their color enters the room before they do. And it just sort of flips it again, like, he's not half, my son's not half, he's double.
Right.
The one that really stopped me, though, and made me realize as a journalist, okay, wait, this is a taproot. This is an opportunity to do some research on race and identity in America and in the intimacy of this issue, as opposed to covering it as a journalist where I'm writing about the things that merit my attention, that demand my attention, that I'm getting inside people's lives and their hearts, their psyche, their homes. was, and there's a whole chapter in the book about it, was the Saturday morning when I'm going through the inbox and a card comes from Louisiana, from Covington, Louisiana, from a woman named, what's about Covington?
It ain't New Orleans.
Okay, card came from Covington, Louisiana, someone named Michele with 2 L's, and her 6 words were, "Black babies cost less to adopt."
Wow.
White woman who had adopted a black son. Now, I was aware of this issue because I had actually written about it before, but as a journalist, right? So I'm talking to the officials, I'm talking to people who work in the adoption industry, if we can call it that, the adoption sector. Industry probably is a bad word since we're talking about people. But this was inside the house.
Yeah.
And she's talking about going through the process of adoption and realizing that the fee structure, she's not talking about buying babies. Black babies cost less to adopt. But you're not buying a child, right? But there is a fee structure that covers legal issues, medical issues, all kinds of things. And she realized that the fee structure associated with the adoption process varied based on the skin color of the child. And she wondered what would happen if her son, found this out when he got older. And I researched this, and I realized that in almost every state,
Wow.
that is actually the case. And some of it is altruistic. African-American families do not participate. Actually, families of color overall do not participate in adoption at the same level as white Americans for all kinds of reasons. In Black culture, there's a very kind of elastic notion of family. People are just scooping people up, and and you don't adopt, but baby, just come. You're part of the family. In Latino culture, it's something else. In Asian culture, it's something else. But so part of this is altruistic to encourage more adoption, to encourage more people to open their heart and their homes in communities of color.
Okay.
So that's part of the reason to have a sliding scale. No one likes the word discount, but it is a discount. But the real reason behind this, it is a reflection of our value system, and I include in the book available adoption situations, and you can't argue. It's right there in black and white. And if you want to adopt a white child, the fee structure is up here. If that child is blonde, it's up a little higher. If the child is Asian, you come down a little bit. If the child is Latino, come down a little bit more. If the child is mixed race, you come down a little bit. If the child is black, you come way down. If the child is a black boy, you go all the way down. That stopped me, and that made me realize. And then when I did a story for NPR, and then what I didn't realize until I wrote the book is I wrote that story, I put it on the air, we moved on, I'm doing other things. I come back to write the book and do more research on this. And I realized that within the adoption industry, when we put that out into the world on NPR, that it continued to ripple in seismic ways within the industry. I didn't realize that as a journalist, I had had that kind of impact on the sector. And I was able to really kind of dig into this and report it from all sides, from an adoptive family to the child of someone who was adopted. The Maddie, who's in the book, showed up and was in the audience in Columbus, to the birth mother, who didn't know that the discount was applied to her child.
Wow. There's something you said in answering the question that's so important. You said it's intimate. This is in the house. And you make this point in framing the 6-word, submissions, that these are intimate stories, close to the ground. You're a storyteller. But these are intimate stories, close to the ground. And you make this claim that these intimate stories give us a certain kind of point of entry to this bigger picture. Talk about what you mean by the intimate nature. I mean, we just heard one example, but flesh that out a little bit more.
So I liken this experience for me over 14 years to eavesdropping with permission. In the book, I describe it like roaming through neighborhoods and hearing what's going on in the house. I'm from Minnesota. My father's from Berkeley.
What part of Minnesota?
Minneapolis. Yes, I did grow up near Prince. And my first cousin was in his band, so we could have a whole conversation about that. And Instagram has figured it out because they serve me a Prince video every morning. Like literally every morning I get a print, and I don't mind. I'm like, but I grew up in working class communities. I was sent south every summer, which was a tradition for people who were part of the Great Migration. They sent the kids back south. And in both Minnesota and in Alabama, I was in working class communities. Nobody had air conditioning. I mean, my father's like, I grew up in Alabama without air conditioning. You're certainly not going to have air conditioning in Minnesota. So we just didn't have air conditioning. So in the summer, everybody's windows were open. We had sleeping porches, which I think are common down here also, where you could sleep on the back porch. It was screened in, or just windows were open. And so as a kid, when I would drive through the neighborhood on my bike, up and down, we had alleys. And up and down the alleys, you heard everybody's business. Because the windows were open, right? You knew who got the new Jackson 5 album. You knew who was arguing. You knew who was trying out for the choir. You just knew everything. And this book is like that. It's like roaming through America's neighborhoods where the windows are open and you can hear everything. But the interesting thing is roaming outside of my neighborhood, because I'm hearing all kinds of people share all kinds of stories. Eddie, one of the things that you talked about, the things that surprised me, we've been doing this for 14 years plus now. In the 14 years that we've been doing this, in the majority of the years that we've been collecting these stories, the majority of the stories that we have collected have come from white Americans. That stunned me, because as a woman of color, and we're talking about race, most conversations about race are by, for, about, centered. I mean, we heard that in the previous conversation. We did not create the problem, but the problem always seems to be focused on us when we're talking about race or racism. So I assumed that when I asked people to talk about race, that most of the people would be people of color. I don't know if it was because I was on NPR. I don't know if it was because modeling. People would come to the website and say, oh, I get to tell my story? Because most of the times when we have a conversation about race, if you have a diversity committee, it's usually not diverse. It's usually, I've been in a part of many diversity committees, and I'm always saying this, if you want to call it the Black People's Committee, let's just call it the Black People's Committee. But if it's going to be a diversity committee, let's bring some diversity into the room. And so I didn't know when I started on this project that I would be embarking on a 14-year odyssey of listening to white Americans talk about race. I didn't even think that was possible.
Wow.
And through this, because so many people have shared their stories, including a lot of people who wouldn't agree with my politics, as an opinion columnist, people who come and say things like, white privilege, earned it, enjoy it. Bet you're not going to publish that. And I put it on the website, and they're like, oh, I get a seat at the table too, because we're trying to hold a mirror up to America so America sees itself on the issue of race.
So when we think about, I was just thinking about this over the 14 years. Michael Brown was still alive 14 years ago. Sandy still had her website, Sandy Speaks. It was still up, generating. George Floyd hadn't moved from Houston to Minneapolis yet.
Tamir Rice was still alive.
Tamir Rice was still alive. And so over the 14 years, the arc, the chaos that has happened, there's one thing about the post-racial moment that triggered your parents to start talking, and you're like, oh, that happened to you that you never said that? But then all of this stuff happened, of course, and then in between, COVID happened.
Yes.
And black and brown people and working people are dying disproportionately. And of course, in the midst of that...
And the border.
And the
Muslim
border.
bans.
And then this guy comes down the damn escalators who owns the gold toilets,
And a lot of people who support him send their stories to me.
Right, so what have you... So intimate.
Yeah.
I've always talked about the intimacy of our hatreds.
Yes.
Right, that folk knew who killed Emmett Till.
Yeah.
Because they drank beer with him.
Yeah. And because they talked about it.
And they played checkers, and while they were playing checkers and stuff.
Yeah.
So the intimacy of the story, what have you seen? The arc. People don't want to talk about it, but they're talking about it with you. What have you seen over these 14 years?
It's so interesting, Eddie, because dendrochronology is a study of tree rings. I'm going to make
Did y'all hear
sense
that?
in a minute. Dendrochronology is a study of tree rings. If you cut a tree down, the tree rings will tell you a story about the surrounding environment. It will tell you about the weather. It will tell you about whether chemicals were introduced. It will tell you about whether the development put stress on the root system. The tree rings will tell a story, and the tree rings never lie. I liken the work that we do through this accidental archive to social dendrochronology. Like many of the things that have happened that you mentioned, and many more, are captured in the tree ring, but you have to pick up like a magnifying glass, because the inbox, we see moments, like Trayvon Martin. I didn't know Trayvon's name, but I knew something was happening in Florida before, because remember when Trayvon Martin was killed,
Right.
it was like 6 weeks before it became national news. But I kept seeing people in Florida talking about some little boy who was walking home who got killed by a neighborhood watch captain. And I'm like, what is this? Before we were responding to it in the newsroom, we saw spikes after January 6th. We saw spikes after George Floyd is killed. We saw spikes when we're debating the Muslim ban. But the interesting thing is if you go to the website, and we have a feature where you can you can put a word in a search engine. George Floyd's name won't come up that often. Barack Obama's name won't come up that often. Donald Trump's name won't come up that often. The Muslim ban will not be mentioned, because when people experience these things, this is the intimacy. What they write about is what that triggers in them. So when Tamir Rice is killed, and a mother, she's in the book, and a mother watches that grainy footage that was released the night that they released that footage, where you see him walking up to a gazebo, and you kind of can't figure it out, but it's a little boy, and police come up, and then suddenly a body falls. Kristen Moorhead watches that on the news. Her son is the same age as Tamir Rice. She is a black woman. She is crying. She doesn't want her son to hear her in the next room. For some reason, she turns to the Race Card Project. She has heard one of the segments on National Public Radio, and she types in these 6 words: "I wish he was a girl." So she's part of the tree ring, but Tamir Rice is not mentioned, but Tamir Rice is the trigger. So that's the intimacy, that people write about things. When someone writes in and says that, that they don't understand the country that they live in, that suddenly in the backstory. The other thing we added on the form, now that people send things in digitally, we added 2 words, anything else, and people can send in a backstory and explain what they meant by their 6 words. So those 6 words we read, you just heard the 6 words and not the backstory. But someone, writes in and says something like, white, not allowed to be proud. They don't explain that in the 6 words, but there's something that triggered that. That they see at their job, people are celebrating, Black History Month. They're celebrating something, and they're like, well, why can't I be proud too? Or they're talking about an America that no longer feels like it belongs to them. Because, and intimate reasons, sometimes it's because of what they see, sometimes it's because more than once we have heard from people who say, the lunchroom is confusing to me. The languages that are spoken at lunch in the factory, their food smells. Why do they sit together? Well, and you wonder, well, you could go sit with them, but that doesn't. But again, it's the intimacy, and people don't know where to turn. I think that people actually do want to talk about race. They're just looking for a way to talk about it through the prism of personal experience, and in a place where they won't face some sort of finger wagging or be immediately judged.
So this is a beautiful book. Just at the level of the book, it's just beautiful. You can put it on your coffee table. But the content is amazing.
And it has 280. If you're intimidated, can I just say,
Sure,
because it's 500 pages. But the reason it's 500 pages is because it's got pictures.
No, it's
And
now the art. Go ahead.
I
I'm
wanted
sorry.
America to see itself. I wanted it to be a jewel box in the book.
Now, the arc of these intimate stories, this beautiful book, I was struck by your conclusion.
Huh.
You said you no longer believe in common ground.
I don't. No, I don't. Wait.
Hold up, not believe in common ground,
Yes.
that it shouldn't be the aim or
Yes.
the aim or goal.
Yes.
Common ground should not be the aim or goal. Instead, we should build bridges. What's the significance of the shift? What made you make that shift? And B, what is the substance of the move from common ground to building bridges?
Yeah. I believe in common ground. I just think that the idea that we're going to occupy ideological common ground is asking too much in this moment. And so I don't in the work that we do. We partner with schools, we partner with corporations, we do a lot of work in cities. And just when I talk about this, I don't talk about necessarily common ground. I think what is more important is figuring out how we can build bridges to people that we don't understand, that we don't agree with, that are different than us, that are foreign in some way. And not even because they're foreigners, just because, you know, your neighbor could be foreign to you. I have assumed through most of my life, I was born in the 60s, I am a child of integration, I just assumed that America would always be in this sort of upward arc when it comes to race. I still believe that, but I believe that too many of us don't understand the work that goes into that. That we have to, you don't lose weight by watching someone on a treadmill. You know, you don't benefit from a better America by expecting someone else to do the work. All of us have to figure out how to do more of that work. And I came to the idea of bridge building because I have 3 children and a nephew that we sopped up, and now a grandson. And he is my heart. His mom is from New Orleans. And I think about the world that the kids are going to inherit, and we keep telling our kids that that they're the generation that's going to fix this. Like, right. I was told that we were told we were the generation that's going to fix this. I don't know if we fixed it. I think we made it maybe better, but we can't legislate this. You know, this is not something that policy will change. Right. It is, again, it's intimate. It has to be much more intimate than that. And so the reason I came to that conclusion is I'm thinking, okay, I want my kids to be leaders. I want them to be upstanders. You know, I want them to live in the world in a way that they live up to their beliefs, but that also that they're agitators and instigators, and that they are catalysts, you know, through the way that they live their lives. And I think that the most important skill for them to be able to do that successfully is to be able to lead groups of people that don't agree with each other. I believe this very strongly, and I'm saying this in a university, and I hope that people who teach young people, who shape young people's minds, please hear me. The greatest skill that leaders will need in the coming workforce is to be able to lead teams of people that do not agree with each other. That has to be an assumption that they will not agree with each other. And we don't teach that, we don't elevate that, we don't celebrate that, we don't see that ability to lead groups that don't agree with each other as a skill set. It's a skill. And when it happens, we assume that it was luck or something, that it just so happened, you know, that the sports teams, I mean, sports is a great example of this. The players and the owners, they are not on the same page half the time. You know, but they figure out how to fly the flag. I know this because we've done some quiet work with sports franchises. A lot of work goes into that. It is not by osmosis. It is not by accident. They know that people are on different sides ideologically, and they know that on every Sunday they have got to get out there and they got to move in the same direction, they got to fly the same flag, they have to support each other. I know this because we have worked in some of the reddest states and some of the reddest counties where people I know don't believe what I believe. My husband worked for Barack Obama. But at the same time, they will quietly call us in because they say, we need to figure out how the team inside this building can work together. Because when you walk into the factory, the bumper stickers in the parking lot tell a story of division. The bumper stickers tell you what you're going to experience inside. And the foreman, and it's usually a man, and I only say only once have we had a woman that's been a foreman, it's usually a man, will bring us in because it's affecting their productivity.
Right.
They're not meeting their numbers. They're not meeting their objectives. They're not meeting their deliverables because the people inside the building don't trust each other, don't like each other, aren't, walking. Injuries are going up. Right. Because you're not talking to him. You walk by and you see that his footwork is wrong, he's in the wrong position. Normally you would say, listen, brother, you need to, like move here, that's dangerous. There's a snag that could catch your arm. I'm not talking to him. Whatever happens, happens. Well, whatever happens is, affects injuries, and then people are out sick, so it affects our productivity. This is an issue, that our divisions, I'm sorry if I sound like I'm a little bit preachy, but we need to think about this. We live in a moment where there are a lot of people who are invested in our divisions as a country. They're invested in it. They are invested in it. It's not, they are working hard. They're working a long, smart game. And it's interesting, I'm saying that's smart, but it is. They're spending money, they're doing focus groups, they're figuring out messaging, and the messaging is different in Louisiana than it is in Montana. It's different in Montana than it is in Wisconsin. It's different in Wisconsin than it is in Boston. They're figuring out how to message to people, often to amplify fear,
Right.
often to stoke discomfort, because it benefits them, because it helps them hold on to power, or because it makes them feel better because, you know, if I feel like I'm better than that person over there, it's a kind of succor, or maybe false succor, but you know, for now, it makes me feel a little bit better. I can hold my head a little bit higher because I'm better than that person over there. That benefits them, but in the end, does it benefit you? Is your rent cheaper?
Right.
Is the cost of milk less than it was? Is the future for your children better in a divided world? And so that's why I feel so strongly that we need to figure out how to have tethers that allow us to understand each other. And the reason that I use bridges, I'm fascinated. I studied engineering before. I studied 3.5 years, finish line in sight, changed majors and went to communications. But I've always been fascinated with bridges and the way bridges are built. And bridges stand up. Bridges hold their place because of oppositional force. It's tensile strength. That's what holds a bridge together. And so that's one of the reasons I think about bridges.
Okay.
And also because when you travel across a bridge, you're surrounded by water here, sometimes too much water. And so you travel across bridges, right? When you travel across a bridge, rarely do you go across a bridge in one direction, unless you're running from something, unless you're moving someplace permanently. But most of us go across a bridge once, explore something, and then go back home to our zone of comfort. That's a way to think about exploring another life. It's not that you need to explore someone's life because you want to indoctrinate them, you want to convert them to your side. I tell my kids, talk to people you don't agree with. You know, even the people who perhaps question your existence. It's worth talking to them, if nothing else, to do reconnaissance, you know, to understand, you know,
Right.
their ideas and where they're coming from. But also, you know, the reason we're in a space, in a city where a room, you know, and I ask people to do this all the time, look around the room. I mean, literally, turn your head, look around the room. And let us remember that within our lifetimes, we're probably close in age, within our lifetimes, a room of this composition would have been unusual,
Unheard of.
would have been illegal, would have caused a lot of umbrage within my lifetime, and I am not that old. Right, so we need to remember that, and remember that one of the reasons that they didn't want rooms that look like this is, you know, I've done a lot of research in writing my first book and going and looking at something akin to an archive like this, looking at letters, looking at minutes of the business council's meeting, looking at diary entries. And one of the things that struck me over and over again is the reasons that they didn't want kids to work together. They didn't want kids to go to school together. They didn't want sports teams to play together. They didn't want white kids listening to so-called Negro music, because they were afraid that if they were this close to each other, they would see each other's humanity.
Yeah.
That's why they didn't. It wasn't because they thought they had cooties or because they thought that they would catch something. It was just the opposite. They thought that if they actually spent time together, it would be harder to hold the line on segregation.
Absolutely.
And it's what Michelle Obama says, it's harder to hate up close. And so if we can't figure out how to be close to each other, let's at least have bridges so we can find each other and have moments of proximity and then retreat to our comfortable zones.
So, I have a nasty tendency to eat into your time. I'm sorry. We have to open it up for questions, but before we do so, as you come up. Now, mind you, we only have 5 minutes, but before, we're going to ask Sister Michele to let us know what's next for the Race Card Project, for this. What's next? And then we'll come to you real quick. So
quickly, I want to make sure that the project stays alive. it grew in my attic, and now I've got this archive that I want to make sure that I find a home for, because journalists in the future, sociologists in the future, anthropologists in the future will look to this to help understand a very interesting moment. But I also want to make sure that the stories that we collected are not like a menagerie, that they're actually to be able to put to use out in the world. So we're actually starting something next month that is inspired by New Orleans.
Next month, inspired by New Orleans.
And is inspired by your former mayor, Mitch Landrieu. For those of you who live here, you may remember the welcome table, bringing people together to talk across difference. What we're going to start doing is a book club that we will ask people to send us your stories and help us understand why you want to bring a group of people together. And it's called Dinner and a Dozen. And we will give you a dozen books, but you have to tell us why you want to bring. Now, my publisher's like, you're supposed to be selling books, not giving books away. But I want people, bridges, again, and through food. And so tell us why you want to bring a group of people together. Maybe it's because you're adopting someone, a child that doesn't look like you, and you want to bring your community together to actually talk about this. Maybe it's because your neighborhood is having some sort of fissure. Maybe it's because you want to bring the mothers together at the local park because you're the woman who keeps getting presumed to be the nanny, and you're not. And you want to say, let's have a conversation about this. I think I got an amen from somewhere in the audience out there. And so tell us your story. Why do you want to bring a dozen people together? We'll send you books. I will buy you dinner. I'm going to try to get to some of these dinners if I can and zoom in to if I can't get
Brilliant. Brilliant. So really quickly, what we're going to do is just get to the question really quickly. We're going to get these 3 questions in, and then you're going to answer them, right? So boom, then we're going to go here, then we're going to go here, then we're going to go here, and then she's going to answer. Yes.
So your first book, The Grace of Silence, highlights the posture of silence your family and their generation took often to stay in peace and resist anger. Your second book pushes back against the posture of silence and instead gently nudges us to talk about the pains of racism. Were you intentional in bringing these books in conversation with each other?
Girl, you just wrote a column.
You want to answer that first, or you want to get all the questions?
That is an easy one, yes,
Yes.
I was. These 2 books are very much in conversation with each other. And the idea that I benefited from my parents' silence. They didn't tell me about the anger that they deservedly, swallowed because they wanted me to soar. But I am glad that I now know some of the things that they experienced because I don't take certain things for granted. I know where we were, and I take great pride in where we've come as a country, but I also know that we will never become our best selves or our best country if we don't figure out how to talk to each other.
Absolutely. Really quickly.
Good morning. We're from my wife and I came from Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, did you know?
Right, to support our cousin, who's another author here. But my question is, because you were talking about the number of responses you received that were from primarily more whites than blacks, do you think that, and just look around the room, you see how we are kind of dispersed now, do you think more that could be part of a lack of the black community knowing about what you're doing, or B, the second part is that do you think more blacks are ashamed to tell the story of what they had to endure as going through slavery during that time?
Yes and yes. I think that there is less awareness in Black America, and I'm trying, and actually Latino, Asian, I want to hear from everybody, and we do, but I'd like to see larger numbers. So I think part of that, I think part of it is the, people not wanting to tell their story. I think there's also a third element, is Black people talk about race all the time. And so often when there's a conversation about race, it's, so Eddie, what do you think?
Yeah.
There's a presumption that Black folks are going to carry that burden or carry that conversation. And so people may think, I've already had that conversation, and so they may be less inclined to share it here. That may be one of the reasons. We get a large number from black folks, but I have just been surprised at the number from white Americans. And we also have submissions from more than 100 countries, so it's not just America.
It's not just America. And you're the last question.
So my question is actually for both of you. How do you manage your exhaustion for educating on how to be Black, or educating white folks on what it's like to be Black?
I don't feel like I educate people on how it's like to be Black. I feel like I turn the mirror on them and say, look at yourselves. I mean, that's what I do in my work, although I'm not dismissing your question because exhaustion is real.
Yeah.
And racial fatigue is real. A lot of people are just tired, of the conversation. When I start to feel some degree of exhaustion, I go to my inbox and I look at what's come over the transom, and that personally gets gets me fired up. But the exhaustion is real. Self-care is necessary. Tapping out, sometimes is necessary. But I've learned the example of that card, I'm not intimidating, you are intimidated. I've learned how to turn the cup in the other direction so the handle is on someone else and basically say it's your turn. And, to figure out how to exercise your curiosity.
I drink too much Irish whiskey. We're going to end with the last thing, just really quick, and we're done. What were your 6 words on your card?
In the beginning, they were fooled them all, not done yet.
Fooled them all, not done yet.
Because I'm a brown girl from Minnesota. I grew up with a significant speech impediment, and no one imagined a lifetime in communications for me. If you know me really well, you still hear it. If you have a speech impediment, you usually don't get over it, you just conquer it, and sometimes it's like sometimes you eat the bear, sometimes the bear eats you. So if you know me well, you can kind of hear it. The 6 words I land on now are still more work to be done.
Still more work to be done.